What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're profiling Floowandereeze, one of the new decks that got released in Burst of Destiny. And I have to say that if you used to be a fan of Monarchs and True Draco, and maybe you still are, but you haven't found a way to play those decks competitively because Konami just wasn't fair with True Draco and Monarchs have just been outdated completely, I think that this deck is probably for you because it basically feels like a combination of those two decks I mentioned. The extra deck is kinda irrelevant, you only use it for cards like Punishment and for maybe the Pots of Prosperity or Extravagance, so you don't really go into the extra deck at all in this deck. So yeah, it's a very control based deck that you never special summon anything, you just normal summon multiple times. So yeah, I think those players are going to be the happiest with this deck, and I think that this is one of the most aesthetic decks that I've ever seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! It just feels so beautiful, so I was very hyped to try it out, and I think that the deck is actually really good. Maybe it's potentially tier 1, maybe not tier 1, tier 1.5 type deck, but still, if Konami puts a ban list out and all those current decks like Tri-Brigade, Drytrons that we've been playing for quite some time get a little bit more hit, then this deck can definitely become a top contender, so I would not sleep on this deck. And if you want to pick this up, it's a fairly budget deck compared to other decks that we've seen in the past, so I think a lot of people are gonna pick it up and enjoy it. So before we begin with the profile, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So starting off with our monsters, we have our little monsters, and the first one is 3 copies of Floowandereeze and Robina. So those little monsters all share the same effect, that when they leave the field they're banished, and then when you summon a winged beast monster, when they're banished, then you can add them back to your hand. So the recursion of this deck is very good. It just always keeps card patterns in his hand, and this card, when it's summoned, you can add one level 4 lower winged beast monster from your deck to your hand, and then you can normal summon one winged beast monster. So all those cards get you more cards to your hand, and they help you go into multiple normal summons during a turn. Not even twice, not even 3 times. Sometimes you can summon even 4 times during one turn. And Robina is the one you want to summon first, because usually what you're going to be searching with this is one of the 3 copies of the Floowandereeze and Eaglin. So it also has the same effect, that when it's then when it leaves the field it's banished, and you add it back when you summon a winged beast. I'm not going to repeat this effect every single time. And this card basically does the exact opposite. You add a level 7 or a higher winged beast monster from your deck to your hand, and then you normal summon again. So when you use your Robina, you're going to search your Eaglin, you're going to normal summon your Eaglin right away, and then Eaglin is going to search you one of your big monsters, and you're going to normal summon again. So it's basically like one card combo that gets you to a big monster on the field, and those 2 monsters are going to go to the banish zone, and then when you summon something else, then you can add them both back into your hand, so you can do the same thing over and over again. So the deck has a self-recursion effect that basically keep it up to be able to grind with other decks, because this is something that other decks like True Draco and Monarchs didn't really have on their own. You had to use other cards to keep card advantage. For example, cards like Heritage and Apocalypse, and Monarch, you had to keep using cards like Idia and Eidos in the graveyard. So these cards, they just work together with each other, so this is why I think that this deck is actually a much better version than the other decks, because yeah, it doesn't play Floodgates, but basically the entire effect is Floodgate, because you also can play Hand Traps, which is really cool because you don't play Card of Demise in a deck like this, so you can actually have more presence going second than other decks. So I think for a control deck, being able to go second as well is very important, because usually the decks we've seen so far were either very going first reliant, or the going second was just popping cards with True Draco, which was not really the best thing depending on the format. But still, I think this deck is really good, and I'm so glad that Konami finally released a control type of deck that can actually play cards like this. Next, we have 2 copies of Floowandereeze and Streep. This card also has the same effect, and of course, if this card is summoned, you can target a card in either graveyard and banish it. So this card basically replaces Diddy Crow. You can also play Diddy Crow in the deck if you want, because it's searchable, because it's a winged beast, but I don't think it's necessary because you have Stry. So this card, you just summon it during your opponent's turn 99% of the time to disrupt them, so you can banish anything. And if Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer becomes as popular as we expect it to be, because we've seen results from the OCG, but we cannot really tell for sure if that's going to happen here as well. But if it does, then I guarantee you that this card is going to get insane value, because Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is a card that if you don't deal with early, the amount of advantage your opponent can get with cards like the materials in the graveyard is absolutely ridiculous. So you need to banish Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer as quickly as possible, otherwise you're going to lose the duel, and this card is going to help you with that. So this is why it's a 2 of. Maybe if Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is not as popular as I believe it's going to be, then you can cut this card at 1, but still it's a decent card, so I'm playing it at 2 for now. Next up, we have 1 copy of Floowandereeze and Toucan. This card, when it's normal summoned, you can target one of your banished Floowandereeze cards and add it to your hand, and then normal summon again. So it gives you some more recursion, because sometimes you're not going to add all the cards back into your hand, or maybe you won't have enough. So this is why this is just another card that can help you get some recursion back. I think it's perfect as a 1-off. I don't think you should play more than 1. It's a really good card, and I think that it's a decent way to get back into the game if things don't go the way you want. Now we go into the actual boss monsters of the deck. So first up, we have 2 copies of Floowandereeze and Empen. So this card, it's a monster that you're going to be summoning 99% of the time going first when you're going for Robina the Eaglin combo. So if this card is tribute summoned, you can add a Floowandereeze spell and trap from your deck to your hand, and then you can normal summon a monster. So even after you summon your big monster, that doesn't mean you're stopping there. No, you get to add another normal summon to your arsenal in the field, so you can see that this deck can actually not stop doing whatever it wants, depending on when you get interrupted. But even if you get interrupted, the deck does have ways to keep going, and I'm going to show you that when we go into the spell and traps. But M-Pen is the one you want to summoning first, and while this card is tribute summon on the field, your opponent can activate the effects of special summon monsters in attack mode. So your opponent either has to summon everything in defense, or if they're playing a link-based deck, they're basically screwed because links cannot go into defense, so they won't be able to activate their effects. So this is also a really good floodgate type effect. So like I mentioned, this deck feels very similar to True Draco, even though it doesn't play floodgates, because it also has a floodgate effect inherent in the deck. So this is why this card is so good when you're trying to go for going first, and it also has a battle boosting effect. So once per battle, during a damage calc, if it battles an opponent's monster, you can banish a card from your hand, and that opponent's monster's current attack and defense become halved till the end of the turn. Banishing cards from your hand, you don't really care. You're gonna banish a Floowandereeze that you're going to add back later during your combos anyway, because they can just normal summon a winged beast, you add them back. So this card basically protects itself and all your other monsters. So yeah, I think this card just makes the deck work, because without this card, you cannot really get access to the spells and traps very easily, and also you don't have a really good monster to go into, because you do play 3 other monsters that you can summon, but I think those other monsters here because of their situational uses, but this card is mostly the card you're going to be looking for. Now for the one-off monsters that you want to be searching, first of all we have Mist Valley Apex Avian. It just gives an Omni Negate to the deck, which is something the deck kinda needs because it doesn't really have it, so I think being able to get into this card is really cool. We also have the 1 copy of Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. Against some decks, especially against Drytron, this card is auto-win, your opponent can't do anything. If you know that your opponent is not going to be able to normal summon something and run over this card, then you can get some really free wins with this card. And we also play 1 copy of Rise of the Mega Monarch. This card you're gonna be summoning during your opponent's turn most of the time, because it has an effect that if you can tribute summon this by tributing a tribute summoned monster, so you can tribute M-Pen with this, and then if this card is tribute summon, you can target 1 card on the field and 1 card in other player's graveyard, and also if it was tributed by tributing a wind monster, you can target an additional card on the field and place the first target on top of the deck in any order, and also return the additional target to the hand. So this card, not only does it play around Enforcer, but it also is a really good disruption. It basically reminds me of going into Erebus during your opponent's turn with escalation. That's basically the best thing I can describe it, because it's very similar. So yeah, this card, I think it's mandatory. I know it's gotten kind of expensive, but still I think if you want to play the deck to the maximum potential, you need to get your hands on this card. For the hand traps, we have 3 copies of Ash Blossom, really good. And one of the reasons I think this deck is really powerful is because it can play 3 copies of Dimension Shifter in the main deck. Any deck that can play Dimension Shifter, I think already has a really good edge on most of the meta, because I don't think we're gonna ever again play in a meta where Graveyard is relevant. I don't think it's possible anymore the way Yu-Gi-Oh has been for pretty much the past couple of years. So yeah, Dimension Shifter, if you can play this in your deck, then you're gonna get some really free wins. Sometimes even if you just use this card in the standby phase, some opponents might actually scoop right away because their deck is so Graveyard reliant. So yeah, and you don't really get hurt with this deck at all, because like I said, everything gets banished anyway, and then you can get them back after you summon something. So yeah, this card has perfect synergy with the deck, and it doesn't hurt it one bit. Now for the spell cards, we have 3 copies of Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map. This is the field spell of the deck, and it's a card that says that during your main phase, you can reveal a level 1 Floowandereeze in your hand. You banish a Floowandereeze card with a different name from your deck, and then you normal summon the revealed monster. So this card acts like an extender, because when you get Veilered or Ashed on one of your monsters, if you don't get the search, then you will not be able to normal summon the extra monster. So this card comes clutch in those types of situations, because a lot of hand traps are being played in this format, so you're gonna face them, so you need a card like this in order to be able to play. And also, if your opponent normal summons a monster, you can immediately normal summon 1 Floowandereeze monster. So when your opponent summons a monster, you can summon the M-Pen from your hand. So even if you're not able, if you get double hand trap, when you summon 1 monster, it gets hand trapped, then you use this card to summon another monster, it gets hand trapped as well, and you're not able to tribute summon again. You can tribute summon during your opponent's turn. So it basically gives you a double extender effect that works during your opponent's turn. So I think this card is absolutely fantastic for the deck, and you need to max it out. And we also play 1 copy of Terraforming to search it, because it's a field spell. Next, we have 1 copy of Floowandereeze and the Unexplored Winds. This card is very similar to Stormforce. So what this card does is that you can tribute summon monster, requires 2 tributes by sending a monster your opponent controls to the graveyard, and 1 monster you control to the graveyard, and it's still treated as a tribute summon. And because this card is a continuous spell, if it sticks on the field, then it's going to get insane value throughout the duel, because you're going to be able to use this effect over and over again. And during your main phase, you can reveal 2 winged beast monsters in your hand, place them on the bottom of their deck in any order, and you draw the same amount of cards. So if you draw cards that you don't really need, if you know that Barrier Statue is a useless card in a certain matchup, or Avian, you don't really want to see that, or multiple copies of cards you don't want in your hand, then you can just put them back and try to dig for something else. So this card is really good, but just because it's searchable with M-Pen, I don't think you need to play it in more than 1 copy, because on its own, it doesn't do anything. It needs a little bit of setup, but if it has that setup, this card is really powerful. 1 copy of Gold Shark, because basically you just banish one of your lower level Floowandereeze, and then you can add them back to your hand when you summon something. Really good card. For the draw cards, play 3 copies of Extravagance. If you have access to Prosperity, then of course it's a better option, because Prosperity is just a superior card because it gives you exactly the card you need. But because the deck is considered kind of budget, not super budget, but budget compared to other decks, decks. I didn't want to make it super expensive by putting in Prosperity, so I put in Extravagance as a more budget option. But of course, if you already have access to Prosperity, then you can play that instead. And we also play 3 copies of Pot of Duality because the deck doesn't special summon anything, so you can get basically another Surge. And 1 copy of Call by the Grave because sometimes an Ash or a Veiler can really hurt the deck. You can also play Book of Moon. I've seen a lot of people play the card. I'm still kind of iffy of how good it is. Maybe it's decent in a deck like this because it doesn't really need its monsters face up to work because it doesn't go into Link monsters or Synchro monsters or anything like that. So maybe it's a good card to dodge Veilers and Imperms. But I think when you're playing D-Shifter, then you dodge Veiler already like that because your opponent is not able to discard from the hand to the graveyard because you cannot send cards to the graveyard. So I think Call by the Grave is a decent card to play around Ash. But of course, if you want to play a Book of Moon, that's basically a really good card you can play in the deck. It's very, very good. I'm just a little bit iffy of how good it is. For the trap cards, we have 1 copy of Floowandereeze and Dreaming Town. This card basically just gives you another normal monster during your opponent's turn. During the main phase, you normal summon level 4 or lower wing beast from your hand. And if this card is in your graveyard, if you tribute summon a level 7 or higher monster, you can banish it and change all monsters your opponent controls to face down defense. And against certain decks, this kind of effect is devastating because when you Book of Eclipse your opponent, they will not be able to do anything because they are not able to Synchro, Xyz, they're not able to Link. So when you well time this card, you can basically stop your opponent's turn completely. And all of these cards are searchable with M-Pen, so you don't really need to play them at more than one. You need to play more cards that do stuff on their own or cards that get you to plays because all these cards don't really do anything on their own. They're just really good when combined with the actual strategy of the deck. We also play 3 copies of Impermanence, rising up the total hand trap count to 9. You can play even more if you want, but I feel like in decks like this where you really want to go first, playing too many hand traps can sometimes screw your plays. But of course, you can play Nibiru, other cards if you want, but I think these 9 for me have been perfectly. And a card that I think is perfect for any type of decks like this that don't go to the extra deck at all is 3 copies of Dogmatica Punishment, because if you don't get hurt by this card's restriction, being able to send NTSS and pop 2 cards, being able to send Wind Pegasus, Ignister and pop 1 card, and then have a backup in the graveyard that makes your opponent's plays a little bit weird and awkward because they know that something is going to get spinned back into the deck the moment they destroy a card. Yeah, cards like this I think are much better than playing Strike or Judgment in the main deck. So yeah, Dogmatica Punishment, really powerful. Now, the extra deck, you don't really need any of these cards aside from the targets for punishment, and I play them 3 ofs because of Extravagance, but if you have Prosperity, you can play even more cards. But the first 9 cards I'm going to show you, don't think that you have to play them. You don't, because you're gonna go to these cards like 1 time out of 30 games. So yeah, we play 3 copies of Assembled Nightingale. You've seen this before. It's basically a Downer combo. We play 3 copies of Downer Magician and 3 copies of Zeus. So yeah, these cards, if you resolve this combo, sometimes it's gonna be devastating, but the problem is that you're not gonna use that too much, so you can basically fill these 9 spots with everything you want. Don't feel like you have to play 3 copies of Zeus. No, you don't, because yeah, it doesn't matter too much. The extra deck, basically those 6 cards are the ones you want to play, and that's 3 copies of NTSS and 3 copies of Wind Pegasus, Ignister, because you do play Extravagance. Again, if you play Prosperity, you can play less copies. You can play 1 and 1 because you choose which cards to banish. But if you choose to play Extravagance, and I think have to max them out, both of them, because the amount of value that each of them gets with punishment is absolutely incredible. And the reason Wind Pegasus sometimes is better than NTSS, because when your opponent normal summons something threatening, you want to be able to send it to the graveyard right away with punishment. But the problem is, if you send NTSS there, your opponent doesn't have another card field, so you're not going to be able to use NTSS's effect. So this is why Wind Pegasus comes up, so you can actually keep it in the graveyard and use it when the time is right. So yeah, guys, I think that this deck is going to become much better coming down the following formats, because ban lists are going to make the existing decks even worse. So when that happens, we already know that the decks that are more recent, that are not going to get touched at all, are going to see the spotlight. So this is why I think if you're a fan of the deck, if you consider playing it, then I would definitely pick it up right now, because the prices are going to skyrocket eventually when other decks get hit. So yeah, I think this deck is definitely going to see tier 1 play really soon. Yep, that's the deck, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.